original office, you know, your
Yeah,
friends on
yeah,
the
yeah,
office
yeah.
name.
Yeah.
Handsome guy. Juicy.
Are we live?
Yeah. I'm just trying to make a tummer. Talk to you, Mike.
Hello, hello, hello.
This is annoying as always. Yeah.
Oh, we're very far away.
On the camera.
Mm.
You go, you. Is anybody even here yet? It's a question.
No, the lads are here, right?
There's people here.
Mm-hmm.
Are they in the office?
They're not in the office, but they're in the office via the live stream.
So,
Cameron Shackleford and the FP Bros. What do you reckon the FP Bros stands for?
don't know.
Lads, if you are just filing in and getting ready for the live stream to start, it'd be great if you could like the stream, because currently less than 60% of you have liked it, and that's not a great sign.
All right.
Are we ready?
I think so. It's about how long just
Video production takes.
sorry, if only there's full-time people you can get to do this. You know?
Imagine if we could hire someone to like set things up for us. How great that would be.
I'm assuming there's not Americans in chat because everyone's saying good morning. Someone said Fick said good afternoon, lads. I assume he's somewhere near us, you know,
Yeah,
on this side of the pond.
yeah.
All right, lads. Good day, Ryan, Alex, Aquila. Tequila, tequila.
It's great to see how many of these names are memorable names from back in the day. Back in the day of the older live streams. Okay. Gabriel says, I like the stream if you chat about Gabriel and Team USA coach pet argument.
No, we're not. There's no. You look right.
Right, we're going to talk about it.
No. So the problem with this, right, is it's a circular argument. You know, you don't get anywhere with this. The thing with this as well is that it's probably hard for some people in the US system to see what this looks like from the outside, especially if you've been around weight for a long time, where it's not that you're even judging anyone for doing anything. And obviously, if you're watching us, you've seen us for a long time, you know, we really don't care if athletes use PEDs or not. It's definitely not something we'll judge anyone for. Some people do, and that's fine, and you can have your own arguments for that, and it's going back and forth, and it goes nowhere. But the problem with this is US would have said for years, and still would say, that the reason their success is because of PEDs, and now we're seeing some success in American weightlifting. So there's no understanding that, wait a minute. For example, if I said to you, I was like, I think North Korea is clean. A lot of people, maybe some of these people arguing that America's clean, would say that's crazy. Of course they're not clean. So then why don't we give them the benefit of doubt? You know, the consistency isn't there. It just seems a little bit hypocritical when you do that kind of defense, when suddenly happy to point the finger at other countries for a long time, and now all of a sudden when we see some of this success, it's like, whoa, how could you say that? I would, for example, Will Fleming, I don't know him, I don't know much about him, to be honest, but he made the original video, and if he was like, look, I don't think they are, I'm with them a lot, they train really hard, if they test positive I'd be disappointed, but I don't think they're taking PEDs, I'd be like, that's okay, it's understandable, you want to defend your friends, nobody would care about that. But you know, don't get kind of pissy about things when it's a reasonable assumption to make, considering people would do it very commonly. You know, America has, as a global sport, has some of the highest number of sanctioned athletes. And if you were to liken that to, let's say London has a phone crime problem, we don't say, look at that and see tons of convictions on phone crime and say, well, they've solved all the phone crime. No, you would say London has a problem with people robbing phones. And there's no reason to not make those logical arguments. Don't want to accuse anyone, and I just don't think we've any interest in it. We're just as much about education as possible and helping people with weightlifting or S&C for sport or strength training. I just think it's super disingenuous. It was also a little bit annoying to call Gabriel a well-known YouTuber. Don't put a bit of respect on Gabriel's
the Olympic medalist.
Yeah, put a bit of respect on it. I just don't get the offense because it makes no difference. Gabriel's not going to go and set up some kind of testing where they're going to get caught. Gabriel's just putting his opinion out there, you know? Be like, Gabriel, I just don't particularly agree. Like, Dane made a nice video. Dane was like, we've known Dane for a while. I like Dane. He said, I don't think they are for this reason. That's perfectly fine. It doesn't really matter to anyone in the grand scheme of things if they are or not. We've always said that we don't particularly care. And it's if they are doing something, fair enough. But if you were to look at this statistically, if you brought this from someone outside, yeah, these are the numbers people have done before and they've tested positive, and this is the numbers these particular athletes are doing. So you'd say, oh, there's a less than zero chance that they're possibly using something, you know? And then there's the argument then as well where it's like, oh, what was the other argument? Oh, now we finally got a system. China has had a system for years, still has a bigger and better system than anyone. Korea has a system. Germany has a system to a certain degree. All these countries have systems in genetic talent. High-level weightlifting talent is rare, but it's not so rare that you need 350 million people. There's 450 million people in Europe alone. There's every other country in the world, which adds up to about 8.5 billion. What are the chances it's suddenly just that genetic talent? You know, I just think it's such a disingenuous argument to be shocked when someone goes, yeah, there's a possibility they're doing something. Like, we have a saying in Ireland, which is, don't piss in my pocket and tell me it's raining outside. And I think this is what's happening. You're pissing in our pockets and being like, there's no way. It's just rain. I'm not pissing in your pocket, probably. Like, I genuinely believe, Will and Dane believe that those athletes are not doing something. But it's crazy, I think, to not just sit down and acknowledge, be like, lads, I can see why you think that, because we would think that about other countries, but this is what I think about those, you know?
For me, it comes down to the crux of the two things. And the first thing is, as Owen mentioned earlier, for the last 20 years, when the topic of USA weightlifting not doing well has come up, they've just said that it's other countries doping. Every single time. I cannot think of a time when that has arisen, when it's not other countries are doping and we're not able to, or else something along the lines of the NFL gets all the good people. That's always what the argument has been. And now suddenly that argument is gone away because there's some talent there. And then the second thing is, the US has more positive drug tests than any other country in the world. And as Owen mentioned, it's like saying the south side of Chicago is actually really safe and there's no gun crime going on there because there's so many gun crime convictions. No, it's not that you've more positive tests because you're testing more people. Sure, there's stuff going on in other countries. There's less testing happening in other countries. But if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
Like, Balco was the biggest private doping organization that was found out about so far. Just because it's not state sponsored doesn't mean there isn't something there. I think it's just such a hypocritical argument.
Also, a massive portion of the intellectual capital around modern doping is in the US right now.
I can think of two of the biggest people who help people do that are both American. America made some of the best drugs. Be proud of it, lads.
Be proud of it.
You invented D-ball, you know? Anyway, on to more
Call me Mr. Zinc.
More important. Victor Conte died in a week. Do you see that?
Oh, did he?
Yeah. He was only in his, I thought it said 50s, maybe in his 60s. Anyway,
Fuck.
More important things. Good morning, brother. Is it possible to, where's that gone? Is it possible to strength train and cardio? Yes.
Certainly.
Can you do strength training and cardio? Absolutely. In fact, I would say you should be doing some kind of cardio for your strength training, if not all year, at least most of the year. You can do any amount of conditioning or any amount of cardio you want to do, any style. You can sit on the rower, you can do ski erg, you can do a little bit of rocking, any amount of just high capacity work done per minute of training done is going to be so useful for your strength training. If there's two things this year we are massive on, one of them is GPP for pretty much everyone, some physical capacity. What was the other thing? There was something else. It'll come to me in a minute. But GPP for strength training, I would say, is absolutely incredibly beneficial. The problem is, if you haven't done any conditioning recently or before, or you've ever done any conditioning, the problem is that if you add in conditioning now, you're going to see a temporary decrease in your strength training unless you do it in a very controlled and titrated manner where you introduce that conditioning slowly. So if you've been someone who has been doing decathlon for years and now you've retired and you're just doing strength training, you can start running probably 5Ks 4 times a week and it's not going to affect your strength training. However, if you're 35, you've gotten strength training 2 years ago and you suddenly want to introduce conditioning after not having done conditioning since you were 10 years old, you're going to see a short-term negative impact on your just ability to recover because it's a new stimulus. So what we usually recommend is you go in low and slow. So if you're doing conditioning, you come in really easy. You start off at 15 minutes on a stationary piece of equipment. Generally, a stationary bike is best. A watt bike will be fine. Rower can be fine if you enjoy it. A lot of technique in rowing, a lot more. And rowers will berate you for your technique if they don't like it, which is fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
Ski erg, anything that you have on a assault bike, just get on it. Generally recommend twice a week, 2 sets of 15 minutes at approximately zone 2. For a lot of people, this will probably somewhere around maybe 120 to 130, maybe a little bit more or less. Get a heart rate monitor. They're pretty cheap and they last quite long. Then every month, just add 5 minutes to that and then titrate it up. However, if you want to do this initially, if you want to get this done faster, this approach will take a couple of months to build up a tolerance. If you were like, okay, I've just had a big peak, I've had a big strength training block, I've hit a load of PBs, I've got 2 months, 6 to 8 weeks to absolutely nail my general conditioning so I can be as strong as possible and as healthy as possible. Don't forget the benefits of conditioning go far beyond just the benefits to your strength training. I would get an assault bike or an air bike, the cheapest one you can get, or whatever you can get your hands on, if it's in the gym, an echo bike, any of them, and go to town on this. If you're very out of shape, initially what I recommend is 8 to 10 sets of somewhere between 8 to 12 calories, as short a rest as possible, and just go as hard as you can on these. If you puke a little bit after, that's not the biggest deal. Ideally, you won't puke, but just do this once to twice a week for a couple of weeks, and you'll see that the initial thresholds for your conditioning will increase a lot. If you're decently conditioned, highly recommend something like their Norwegian 4x4. So if you've a solid base in conditioning, but you want to improve it for a work capacity phase, Norwegian 4x4 is fantastic. You can look up that protocol. It's very, very simple. It became a little bit of a meme from some kind of podcast, but it's highly effective. The main thing with something like the high threshold training is you're trying to do as much time as possible at that higher threshold. All of these forms of cardio will benefit you for strength training because, if you're very out of shape, if you don't have good, for example, VO2 max, mitochondrial density, if you don't have this ability to recover quickly between reps, between sets, between exercises, between days, your metabolic health will be improved. It's not only is it possible to strength training cardio, I would almost say it's pretty much paramount that you do some kind of cardio conditioning if you want to be the best strength training athlete you can be. Be all you can be.
The FP Bros with a super like.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry.
Says, how do you feel about pushing Zercher squat progression? We're really not fans of Zercher squats around here. Zercher squats basically tucking the barbell into your elbows, holding onto it in this kind of position. Pretty popular in the squat form, also quite popular in the kind of deadlift or pull form. They are not the thing you really need to be doing in almost every sporting context or in almost every kind of athletic development context. To give a bit of background on this, generally speaking, you see Zercher squats being popular in populations of people with internally rotated shoulders, rounded forward, and poor posture. They become popular there because they don't have to get into this super upright barbell position to do a back squat. They don't have to have the level of external rotation of the shoulders to be able to do a front squat. And so when you get cohorts of people like MMA fighters, grappling athletes, rugby players to a certain extent, it's just easy to get everyone to do Zercher squats. They feel quite good. You feel like you're getting a lot of work done. Leading on from that is the first main issue of the Zercher squat, and that is posturally, they're pretty much dog shit. Usually, or generally speaking, 90% of people doing Zercher squats are going to round over their upper back slightly. They'll regress to a secondary position at some point during those reps, whether it's a Zercher squat, a Zercher deadlift, any of these things, you're going to see that regression to a secondary position. And that is usually a pretty general rounding of the T-spine and the upper back. We don't like that. That's a bad position for your upper back to be in. If you're 180 kilos and you're a strong man doing some deadlifts, maybe it's not that bad a position. If you're a general person trying to get stronger, fitter, more explosive, it's not the position you want to be lifting the most weight in. That moves us on to our second point, and that is you are not going to be able to shift the same amount of weight as quickly or as well on a Zercher squat as you will if it's in a front squat or a back squat. When we have the bar stacked up on our back here in a nice mid-bar position or a high bar or low bar position, our spine is in a really good position, but also that barbell isn't really pushing on any soft fleshy areas. We're not going to get any of this neural inhibition that will occur when our body feels like it's not in the ideal state to be accepting that load. When we start stacking the barbell down on the face of our elbow in the Zercher squat, we will get a fairly significant amount of neural inhibition because that barbell is just pushing down on a bicep tendon and into our forearm, and our brain will just turn our quads off or our glutes off a slight amount to not allow us for maximum voluntary contraction. When the barbell sits on our shoulder, it's in a much safer position to be driving more aggressively through, and then it allows us to be a bit more explosive, a bit stronger, drive a few more thousand neurotransmitters down our spinal column to be able to lift more weight here. The back squat, the front squat, the belt squat, almost every squat variation is going to be more beneficial to you than the Zercher squat variation. And to be honest, Zercher squats should be kept there for novelty's sake or in very specific injury rehab cases where someone just can't manipulate their shoulders into those positions. But I would say if you never did a Zercher squat or Zercher deadlift again, it would probably be a better thing for your S&C work.
I think ultimately it comes down to the fact that what are you trying to get out of Zerchers, and are you trying to get a leg exercise from squatting? So ultimately, back squatting will allow you to do more volume with heavier weight than the Zercher squat. So ultimately, we've won that kind of argument between two exercises. So if you're thinking, okay, what does this athlete need? Does he need Zercher squats or front squats or back squats? The back squat would win out in that fashion because if you're looking at lower body improvements, if you're trying to improve the capacity of the lower body and maybe overall coordination, the back squat's going to win there because you can just do more weight, more volume, and ultimately get heavier weights, but probably more consistent technique. The torso, it's the same reason that we don't love the front squat for athletes. It's definitely a good place in certain scenarios. The odd time an athlete would benefit from it if the situation forces them to use the front squat, or if they just really like it, is the fact that the torso becomes the limiting factor and not the legs. And if we're doing a leg focused exercise, then the back squat is going to win out over that Zercher squat. So when it comes to maybe driving the torso, if you really feel like it's a beneficial exercise, maybe if you're doing Zercher good mornings or you're doing Zercher back extensions, or if you really want to do the Zercher squat for that back, then that's acceptable. We don't particularly like that because we prefer to isolate some of that loading a little bit differently. If we're focusing on the legs, want to get maximum efficiency with that training, the back squat covers a huge amount of that. And if we're trying to maintain or improve upon the mid back or upper back, we're going to be looking at rows, back extensions, good mornings, weighted pull-ups, things that isolate the fatigue a little bit more so they flow a bit more coherently with the programming. Ultimately, though, if you're someone who's never done strength training and you just love the Zercher squat and you just hate doing everything else and you're doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or something like that or grappling and you just get really consistent with the Zercher squat, we're still happy in that fashion because that means you're doing some good strength training. And, it's not like back squat is 100 most optimal up here, best for what you're trying to do, and the Zercher is a 2 out of 100, for example. The efficiency are closer than they are from doing nothing. But if you're trying to be just the most effective with a training, get in, get out, especially with athletes, loads of athletes don't even like going to the gym. So if you can just make that really efficient and get sure, consistent results or as close as we can to get that, things like the back squat win out. So we don't use the Zercher squat. But again, if you get up to 250 kilos on a Zercher squat, then you're going to get plenty of benefits from it. It's not to say that it's not strength training, it's not effective. The other thing as well is that there is a lot going on in the forearm in terms of extensors and flexors. You'd be surprised how easy it is to tear these. It happens quite frequently to people in jiu-jitsu and stuff like that, where you tear these extensors or flexors, and you don't want to be getting surgery on those. So when it comes to those, repairing those and rehabbing them, they're a disaster and inhibits a lot of the rest of your training. So less of a concern, but certainly still noteworthy when comparing exercises and efficiency and safety. We just don't really love the Zercher, but again, it's still strength training. And if you just like, I'm just strength training because I like strength training, the Zercher is the cool lift I want to do, then perfectly go ahead for it. But if we're looking at it for sports, then we think there's more effective ways of doing it.
It's just the worst type of strength training.
Oh, hang on, let's get going. Best seek a program for GPP face for weightlifting.
So on the app, you'll see there's the off-season program. This is specifically written to give you an off-season from weightlifting. Now, we'll also have athletes from other sports delving into the off-season program very regularly, but it's a strength and hypertrophy block. You can do 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, whatever you want to do with those off-season pieces. They'll basically extend onto each other as much as you want, and they'll be very effective for that. The problem with the GPP phase for weightlifting is that many people actually don't take a GPP phase. And what they'll do is they'll do a weightlifting off season where they still do loads of snatches and clean and jerks. They're still snatching or clean and jerky in every or in every session. And they end up never really taking a break. They never take an off-season piece. So when you're asking about GPP for weightlifting, in my opinion, it starts off with the overall planning of the program. And it starts off with taking a period of time where you're in an off-season piece where you can really work on general physical preparedness. Obviously, if you start doing higher volume work on the snatches, longer complexes in the clean and jerk, using a lot of derivatives for quite a bit of volume with the, let's say, snatch pull plus hang snatch plus overhead squat type things, you'll obviously build a fairly significant amount of general physical preparedness. But in my opinion, that's still a little bit too specific for what most weightlifters need. Most weightlifters need a period of time where they're just strength training, just doing some additional cardio work that will allow their joints, their tendons, all of those niggly little injuries to subside a little bit. And then it only takes a month or 2 months to get really, really pumped and primed again for weightlifting. So I would say over the course of a year-long season, you're probably looking at taking 2 off-season pieces, kind of 4 to 8 weeks each. And I would use the off-season program for that.
Marcus Boxall says, I really want to push my fitness for rugby. What do you recommend for in and off season?
The biggest problem with pushing your fitness for rugby is the fact that in season, your fitness is improving massively, but adding in additional fitness work on top of that will almost certainly get to the point of overtraining very, very quickly. So when we're in season, you're probably playing 2 or 3 games per month. That means in the month where we have 8 pitch training sessions and we have 2 or 3 games on top of that, we have a fair amount of physical contact that we have to recover from. We have a fair amount of kind of knocks that will come along with that. And we have all the on the feet conditioning work that's going to really break us down. Things like plantar fasciitis, knee tendonitis, all of these things are going to come from that on the feet conditioning that we're already getting in our pitch sessions and our games. Because of that, when we're in the in-season, what I'd really like you to do is twice per week, get an erg that you're pretty good at using. So get a rowing erg, get a bike, get an air bike, get a ski erg, get good and get efficient at the movement itself. So it's not like you're sitting on a rowing machine and just pulling the rope off at every single time. Like, actually learn the movement, take some time, maybe do some tutorials or reach out to somebody else in your club to help you along with that. If you're using a bike, make sure the bike is set up correctly. Make sure the saddle's at the correct height. Make sure you're setting it up where the optimal amount of intensity is being used for the training session itself. Don't just hop on it and start pedaling. And then once you have that set up, and once you have that erg selected, I would say at least twice per week, do something like the Norwegian 4x4, do something like a high intensity interval period where it's 20 seconds of work, 10 seconds off, 10 seconds of work, 20 seconds off. You're looking for around 15 to 20 minutes for each of these interval sessions. Push it quite hard, keep the intensity quite high. You'll have quite enough of the longer to medium term work capacity going on with your general pitch training and general matches. So keep these intense, or keep these sessions quite intense. Then for the off season, it's going to be very different. So in the off season, We're going to be in the gym, ideally 3-4 times per week. We're going to be lifting heavy weights, trying to bulk up as much as you can, trying to move those 1RM numbers as high as we physically can. And because of that, we're not really on the pitch too much. We're not really running around too much. We're certainly not taking any bangs or being in contact at all in our off season. And therefore, we can go to some on the pitch conditioning. On the pitch conditioning for me in the off season will look like running intervals. It might look like derivatives of a Bronco. So it might be 10, 20, 30, 40 meter shuttles. It might be Bronco sets where rather than doing 5 reps on a Bronco, we're just doing 1 set, take a rest, 1 set, take a rest. It might be some slightly longer runs, maybe once or twice per week. But basically putting your boots on, running on the pitch twice per week is going to be the ideal thing for that off-season period then.
Good morning from USA. These Team USA coaches acting up are silly. Definitely. There's a saying, the louder they spoke of their honor, the faster we counted the spoons, which basically means the more someone protested, the more you were actually concerned that they were doing something nefarious. Again, I would just have so much more respect if there was like, yeah, they're not on gear, I don't think they are, and just let the lifting happen. Like, you're not going to convince people one way or the other realistically. But now if one of them test positive, everyone's going to be like, what were you saying recently? Multi Vixen says, hi, do you have any advice for advanced strongmen with upper back limitation during heavy deadlifts, upper back rounding during RDLs, and upper back limitation during high bar SSB squats? Yes, I do, Multi Vixen. Surprisingly, a weird number of high level strongmen have come to us over the years for help with really specific things, usually mobility and overhead strength. I don't know why. You get a random consultation and you'll be like, oh, that's so and so. But anyway, specific to this, what we need to look at here is you need to look at soft tissue work. You need to look at mass and joint range of motion available to you at your current mass. So if you're saying advanced strongman, I'm assuming you're pretty big multi-vixen. So we need to look at mobility and the suppleness of the soft tissue in relation to this before we actually start worrying about maintaining positions via specific strength work. So what we need to start doing here is you need to do 2 things really consistently. First of all, you need to get someone else to do soft tissue work on you. You just won't be able to make the meaningful changes by yourself unless you've gotten a big chunk of the work done by getting a physical therapist, a physical masseuse, someone to absolutely get their hands on you. Again, if you're bigger and you're stronger, you're going to have a lot of muscle mass. You're going to have possibly a lot of fat in the way. You might have some upper back mass there that's just so hard for you to realistically get at with a foam roller or a soft tissue ball. Now, they will assist, but our first priority here, even before we get stretching or looking at those positions, what we need to start looking at is actually getting a bit more suppleness with the tissue involved in those movements. So we're looking at lats, pecs, external rotation, traps, thoracic, and the erectors all need to be at least once a week, but preferably twice a week if funds and time allow you to improve upon this. And this goes for pretty much everyone if you're having trouble with upper back. You need to get soft tissue work done on that. You need to restore that range of motion as much as you can possibly get. See, the problem with this particular scenario for strongman is the fact that if your upper back is consistently going to a rounded position, it's not a strength issue. It's not necessarily a specific weakness in your upper back. It's the fact that you don't have access to this range of motion freely. And as a result, you're defaulting to that rounded position because not that you lack strength, it's because you don't have access to that position. So the first thing you need to do is get lots of soft tissue work done. Then after the soft tissue work is done, or while you're doing that, start doing some static stretching. And on top of that, some isometrics where you're really forcing that position. So static stretching will be useful for a strongman. But when we're in this kind of position, if we're trying to get what you call neutral upper back, so heavy deadlifts, for example, I want you to start just doing things with 70 kilos on a bar, 40 kilos, maybe an empty barbell, where you're just holding the barbell at knee height and you're trying to extend the upper back as much as possible. I want you to hold that for at least 30 seconds, but a little bit more is good. And preferably you do that as soon after in proximity to when you got that soft tissue work done. So you're getting the tissue more supple, you're giving the opportunity to access the range of motion. And then the whole idea is you're trying to reinforce this new range of motion. And these isometrics will allow you to work that position a little bit more. Now, we don't necessarily need you to be in a position where you're super extended like this, but you do need to be in a position where you're a little bit better than where you are, obviously, if you've identified that as a problem. So they're the 2 main areas I'd be looking at. And then in terms of specifically improving it with direct work, everything goes. Everything that's upper back is beneficial. You know, horizontal rows, cabled rows, weighted pull-ups, chin-ups, good mornings. A lot of time as well at that upper back, you don't actually pay much attention, but the hamstrings and glutes control the pelvic position a lot. And if we don't have great range of motion there, you're not going to be able to control the thoracic position as much as possible. So I don't know if you watched recently, but we did a video with one of our powerlifters, Jamie. He's a big dude, and he had good mornings in his program primarily as a mobility exercise for the hamstrings and the glutes and the lower back to maintain good position there. And then he'll have a better time maintaining those positions under load. So mobility is your big key here. It's probably not specific strength. So isometrics, soft tissue work, and static stretching are the name of the game.
Yeah, I definitely say look at that hip and posterior chain mobility. A lot of the time you see people going into those positions, particularly bigger, strong men, bigger athletes. It's after the barbell's passing their knee or after they're coming down to the bottom of those reps. And it really is just the hips are just getting restricted in that bottom position. Glutes, hamstrings, erectors, like Gerf is talking about, you just don't have that range, and then you're reaching down in with your shoulders. It's particularly evident when you look at Eddie Hall, look at any of the professional strongmen when they go to set up for deadlifts with a standard deadlift bar. You'll see how restricted they are. Like just setting up their straps, they have to go on their knees. Then they'll kind of get up onto 2 feet. Granted, they're wearing a suit, which is adding a fair bit of tension there. But you see what that restriction does and why they have to go into that rounded upper back position because of it. Do you have banana bread next?
Yes.
Question regarding extending accessory programming. Instead of cycling different accessories every few weeks, is it advisable to extend them? Example, belt squat, reverse lunge to the full 3-month block. If so, sets, reps, advice. So a lot of our programs, when you look through them, let's say you're on the app, you're looking at the horse program, and you'll notice something that goes from chin-up descents into pull-ups, into wide grip pull-ups. Now, in that case, you're probably looking at changing the specific exercise of the accessory itself, or that area that accessory occupies. You're probably looking at that changing every 4, 6, or 8 weeks, right? The specific exercise will be changed out. You will probably have done somewhere between 4 and 8 sessions with that specific exercise being used in there. In this case, it's changing out for 2 reasons. The first reason we change it out is to bring it to a slightly more advanced or an easier to load variation that we're talking about. So in this case, if it's pull-ups and we were just doing pull-up descents, just going to a standard pull-up after that or a wide grip pull-up after that means the relative intensity of that exercise is going to be a little bit higher. So rather than having to load you up with weight or load you up with a massive amount of volume, we can rather just move to a slightly more intense or relatively difficult variation of that exercise, and we have a nice form of progression there that moves us on. The second reason you see those actual exercises being changed is for the sake of novelty in people's programming. People get super sick of doing the same thing for 3 or 4 months in a row. It's not necessarily that it's the wrong thing. You'll notice that that area of your program that is fulfilled by that accessory we were talking about adapting and changing over time, if we were to keep that as standard planks, slowly but surely increasing the amount of time we're holding the plank for, slowly but surely increasing the overall volume you're doing in the planks over the course of 16 weeks, people just get sick of it. And it's just human nature. It's not necessarily a bad thing that people are getting sick of it, but just having some sense of novelty in there where it's a slightly different variation of that movement you're doing. In this case, it should always be a variation that is moving you forward, whether that be in terms of overall volume, overall intensity, or overall skill level of the movement. But that's the second reason it's in there, is just to keep things fresh, to keep things moving. If you were writing your own programming and you're looking at a 3-month block, I would not say to keep it the same the whole way through. The accessories are the first thing that always get compromised in a training session. If I have to leave early, I'm never cutting out my working sets and squats. I'll just cut out the planks at the end. If I'm feeling tired, I'll never cut down the overall load I'm going to do for my deadlifts. I'll just cut out the accessories I'm going to do at the end. If I have to make up a session at the end of the week and I'm quite compressed in terms of time, I'll never cut down my rest periods between my working set. It's always the accessories that get chucked out. And so I wouldn't keep it the same, because the accessories are actually where you need to do the most kind of gymnastics or the most mental gymnastics with keeping things fresh, keeping things interesting, and making sure you're getting them all done.
M says, less dramatic. Did you see the 2027 World Cup draw? I haven't seen any results of it yet.
I did.
What's-
It's very good for us.
Who's in the pool?
We have Scotland and Portugal and someone else.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
So, yeah, we obviously had the pool of death last time, and it was
very, very intense.
yeah, but sure, we got out of it. It wasn't the pool stage.
No, it was
where
the pool
problem.
stage. No, it was not the pool stage.
Yeah, I haven't seen all of the groups. I just saw the Irish pool was popped up on a few different channels earlier on today. So it's a
Still 2 years to go as well, so a lot will be different. Portugal could be amazing in 2 years. You don't know that.
they won't be.
Anthony Yanaya said, been watching you guys for a couple of years. Thanks for keeping it real all the time. No problem. A well-known YouTuber about crazy. Yeah, it is. That was probably the only thing that really annoyed me, was like, don't,
That's such a disrespectful comment.
give a man who was 88 kilos and snatched 190 kilos and clean and jerk 225 a bit more. Give someone who can clean and jerk your total a bit more credence, would you?
I would say Gabriel has achieved more than any senior US male had in history.
Yeah, like give him, don't be. There was just no need for that. Just
No.
be. Americans forget they're also humans. You're as a YouTuber. Yeah, that's definitely Henshin. There was just no need. Just be like, you know what? I don't agree with what Gabriel said. You can address it. Obviously,
Yeah.
that's the point of social media. But just do it in a way where you're like, I can see how this looks from the outside. I know these really well. I don't think anyone's doping. I would hate to be proved wrong. I respect Gabriel's opinion. He's a very good weightlifter. He knows things about it. Don't get your pitchfork, because now when someone tests positive, everyone's going to be like, oh, what were you saying earlier? Like, it's not a good move. Like, it's such a defensive move. I think it's just really silly to act like that. It's also really immature. I think I would have so much more respect for Will if he was like, because I believe Dane doesn't think anyone's doping. I don't know Will, but I'm going to give him the benefit out here and say that he believes no one's doping. Make a thing, say, look, there was a clip there. I don't think there's anything to it. I think they're not doping. I know them really well. I'd hate to be disappointed. But don't refer to, obviously, that's just really bitchy. And that just immediately turns me off. Someone, you're like, oh, okay, I see how that is. There was Wanka Barsum. RTA max incoming. If I take 10-pound jumps, fail a single, reduced by 5 pounds and nail it, continue climbing after? No, because if you go a 10-pound jump, you go back and you hit the 5, what's left is another 2.5 or 5-pound jump. You're just probably going to fail that again. But on the max out, there's nothing wrong with just going to town on it.
The problem here is...
I don't want to be misquoted on this, but failing back squats for the most part at most people's level isn't that big a deal, unless there's something really bad happening. There's too many caveats.
Unless you fail it because of a quad tear.
Oh, there's so much content. Okay, in general, it's not that big a deal to fail a back squat.
It's not that bad. It's not that bad. For me, another little caveat to this is, what does the 10-pound jump failure look like? Did you just kind of shit the bed? Did you sit down really slowly and kind of wait for the bottom position to come up and meet you? Did you fail because you lost your balance a little bit and then you drop back down? Or were you just worried that, people fail reps for doing really stupid things in the back squat that has nothing to do with how strong they actually are in comparison to the weight? A lot of the time, reducing something by 5 pounds, like, what is 5 pounds, 2.5 kilos?
About 2.5, yeah.
Reducing something by 2.5 kilos and then make it means you just messed up the last time. So, we're not going to tell you to do this kind of 2 step forwards, 1 step back thing and to keep going and it'll all be grand. It might be grand, but context is massively important here. And this is why when you're maxing out and going for heavier sessions, having somebody around you there is really important. Somebody who's just going to say, stop being an idiot, put the weight on the bar. Or somebody is going to say, you failed that 4 times, why are you going again? Having that around you is massively valuable. So try and get a training partner, someone to be in the gym.
Happy Ginger Time says, not injury question, so I won't even mention about injury, but how do you mentally deal with days when you're recovering, but it feels like a glacier-like pace? So injury, rehab, and recovery in the mental side of that thing is a bit different to slow progress. The simple answer for both of those is, when it comes to slow progress, You need to be really process orientated. So that kind of growth mindset where you're just focusing on the sets and reps you're doing. You don't even necessarily need to have this overarching, undeniable belief that you're definitely going to hit this number. You don't even, it's, you can have it, but you don't need to be thinking about it all the time. You don't need to come into every session and think, this is what I'm going to do to hit a 100 kilo snatch. This is definitely it. That can help some people. Some people get caught up in that and get too concerned with it. What you really need to do is, assuming you're on a good program and you're in a position where the training makes sense, is you just have to deal with each day as it comes. You don't worry about the weeks ahead because you either have someone taking care of your programming or you have maybe your own programming done and you trust it. So in that case, you just nice and process oriented. Like for example, at the moment, I'm finally able to kind of push it a bit again from the knee injury. And, you know, would you look at it from the outside and say, I don't, it mustn't be enjoyable doing 100 kilo snatches 2 or 3 times a week and 110 kilo snatches 2 or 3 times a week and then 120. Like I did some singles at 130 recently last week and I was really, really happy with them. So you have to put everything in context in your training. You have to be really happy with the wins in the context where things are. And if you can start just being really, really zen with the process and just doing what needs to be doing and not expecting too much of it or not getting really down because you feel like this isn't necessarily going in that fashion, that becomes then how you end up getting that long-term process. Now, you do have to have a bit of drive and motivation, of course, but when you see people who treat every session like it's the absolute just training to the death, just pushing yourself as hard as possible, every session is make or break with session. The problem with that is every session simply cannot be a great session. I need to do this for a video where I wanted to map out if every weightlifting session felt like a good session or a bad session. So a lot of times people come into a session, they don't feel great, but they hit what they need to do. And because they didn't feel great, they associate that with a bad session. But rather, did you get the work you needed to get done? Yes, then that makes it a good session. That's all that matters. So when you're recovering or training's tough, you just need to almost relax a little bit. Every time I see someone who's like crazy intense, who's pushing every session with a zero abandon to any kind of rigor or being smart about how the training is, they often either get injured or it really starts to affect them outside of training, which is super unproductive. You need to just close off training in certain ways and you need to treat sessions as they are. And if at the moment, for me, 100 kilo triples are what needs to be done, then that's what needs to be done. Do I want to be doing 60% of my all-time best? You could look at it and say, you might assume, oh, that's awful. How boring that must be. Or doing 200 kilo for triples now on the back squat, which is like 60%. That's not, or 70 or something. That's not how I treat it. Every time they go well, I'm really happy. So if you can, dare I say, become a bit more of that kind of gratitude mindset with sessions, and you can start to appreciate that this is probably taking you where you want to go when you're able to train, then you'll be better off. In terms of recovering from injury is, again, similar to confidence. You just have to be confident to know that what you're doing is going to help you recover, no matter how long it takes.
You, on the injury side of things as well, you really have to get two major things into your brain. And you might have to get them into your brain by writing it on your hand and staring at it every day. And the first one is the non-linear fashion of tissue recovery in normal organic beings. If you have a torn tendon, a broken limb, whatever it is, people expect it to be day one of being injured, it's quite sore. Day two, it's less sore. Day three, it's less sore. Day four, it's stronger. Day five, it's stronger. And that is simply not true. Certainly when we look at it in terms of weeks, months, or years, that will be the fashion where everything is improving and the slope of that line is nice and consistent. But when you go day to day, there will be massive inconsistencies in how that is feeling, how that actually is as a structural entity, and how well you're going to be able to move around with it. So if you're knitting a bone back together, you might have a really good feeling of stability and pain free at the end of week 3, or as we get into week 4 of any of those kind of longer normal bones within the body. It's very normal for week 5 or 6 then for you to have a lot of pain and discomfort in the limb. It's not something where you're going to see this super linear recovery all the time, particularly when we get into more of the sensitive areas like tendon rehabilitation, particularly once you get into more of the areas that have slightly more neurological sensitivity, like when we look at tendons and loading tendons and the fact that we're going to be moving around all day and that tendon will be loading and unloading its force constantly. You cannot and should not expect that to be after 2 weeks it'll be like this, and after 3 weeks it'll be like this, and after 4 weeks it's going to be perfect. Obviously there are standard return to play protocols, obviously there are expected recovery timelines, but you should not expect it to be perfectly linear in a day-to-day fashion. And so just because you go to open a door handle with your left hand and it's still sore, and you thought that after 7 weeks it wouldn't be still sore, that's not necessarily an issue. The second thing you have to get into your brain is that you should be chasing something else as if your entire athletic career or your entire athletic personality is based off it, right? So if you're a weightlifter and you've hurt your knees and you can't do weightlifting, then go and get after something else. Have a secondary goal to put all of your neuroticism into. Have something else to put all of that real drive and motivation that you have from your sport that you're not able to do right now. So if you're after rupturing your MCL, get a massive bench press. If you're after damaging your back and you can't train at all, then really clean up your diet and make sure your physique is as good as it can possibly be by the end of this rehab period. Like, chase something with the same veracity and the same level of intensity that you're chasing your sporting goals with, and it'll make that entire rehab process so much easier to get through while maintaining your sanity.
What does Pierce Demas do with USA weightlifting? Is he involved in it still?
Is he still there?
I think he's still involved. I'm pretty sure he is. Like, would you look me in the eye? Would you ask those and be like, yeah, he was 100% clean? Do you know? Would you be like, yeah, he definitely was. 3-time Olympian. Greece isn't.
I thought that was...
you know?
Did he not get...
No, Demas didn't get popped. You know, it's just the...
I wish they could see one of the best of all time.
Yeah, I wish they could see how this looks from the outside, from just kind of it's not a biased opinion, but a bit more of a relaxed opinion on this. Anyway, so Rock God John F sounds like a injury question, and we don't do injury questions because we can't help you sufficiently. And this definitely sounds like something you need to get sorted, because you're saying really debilitating muscle soreness. So that definitely, Rock, you need to go see someone. I don't know what that could be. It could be something tiny, it could be something bigger, but it could be so many different things. When it comes to injuries, we just couldn't give you a good answer. So if someone says debilitating muscle soreness, you definitely need to just get that looked at, see what it is. We couldn't help you on the stream.
Swiskies up next.
He's right here.
Hi, lads. I can pull under a snatch really well, but for the life of me, I can't seem to get lower than the power position in the clean, even after trying different cues. Anything ideas? Getting under the snatch and getting under the clean rely on the same things, right? So you have to obviously have momentum in training. You obviously have to have a level of experience. You have to have a level of physical prowess where your brain won't subconsciously stop you from pulling underneath the barbell, which leads me to believe that it is something specific to the clean and not necessarily a cueing issue. In many cases, when we come across things like this, it's going to be some positional restriction. It might be some poor mechanics in the pull of the clean, but it's definitely due to something with your catching position or pulling position that your body's not allowing you to get underneath that barbell. In some cases, we can have people with very restricted front rack positions where they really struggle to pull themselves underneath the barbell. And so in that case, they end up catching the clean really high because it's really uncomfortable for them to accept the bar. Just as common as that is we start seeing people over pulling the bar in the clean. They have the similar mechanics than they do in their snatch, but they get away with it in the snatch because the barbell is traveling so much longer through air, right? So imagine you're spending a split second too long at the top of the extension. You're over pulling the barbell. Your shoulders are going too far behind it. We'll get away with that on the snatch, but we won't necessarily get away with it on the clean. So they're probably the two main areas that delve into and really look into. Are you overly extending at the top of your pull? Are you spending too long in that extended position? And then the second one, is that front rack mobility, that actual receiving the barbell position. What does that look like?
You could imagine over pulling the clean, I'd say, could you?
Oh, I can imagine it
Could you?
real well.
I'd say you could really.
I can really.
I think you could put yourself in that zone. Cormac said, "Afternoon. How does the app work? Do you buy specific programs? You can see the exercises." Connor, you get Cormac, you get access to all the programs once you subscribe. You can actually go and look now. There's a 7-day free trial. There's absolutely no payment taken. We're actually looking at just making that even less friction. So you can just sign up to the app, look at the programs, you'll see what's included, and you'll get an idea of what's in the program, how long it is, how many days per week. And then once you pay for your subscription, you can change between programs anytime. So there's no restrictions on what program you're on. So it's all there for you. And you get access to the chatbot. So you can talk to us directly if there's an issue. We can
Which we need to stop calling the chat bot because it's not a bot.
That's a chat bot. Straight into the, thank you for correcting me. You access to the coach chat. It's just us on the other side of the chat. Spelling mistakes and all. Probably in the new year, we'll be adding video feedback as well to the app. So it's going to be even more better. And we'll be getting the annual subscription set up because I know lots of people want annual subscription. Safe Quasi says, when the squad and plyo programming, the squad and sprint program will be coming hopefully in January. So there's just some slight changes that need to be made to the back end before we can put that up. But hopefully in January should be available for the new year.
Joe 604 iPod says, thoughts on nutrition, and then in brackets, micros from whole foods for strength and hypertrophy versus macros met by adding multivitamins. Panna and Clarence are very light for their strength and eat cleanly. Who's Panna?
Panna's the powerlifter, the French powerlifter who has the squat.
Yes. In terms of sports performance and in terms of actual outcomes in large scale sport, the macros and the calorie intake is the most important thing. And I think pretty much everyone will agree with you. In terms of eating cleanly, in terms of how you will feel, in terms of your overall energy levels, eating more clean from whole foods, you will definitely feel a lot better. I have to say this. When you see people on social media with very good numbers, with incredible sporting achievements, like Clarence in this case, you are looking at the genetic elite of people that you have probably never met in your entire life. Me and Owen have met more professional high-level athletes than almost anyone you've ever met, almost anyone you could ever imagine. And Clarence is still up there with one of the freakiest freaks you could ever come across. Never, ever mistake what genetic freakedness and talent will do for someone versus nutrition, versus training programming, versus anything along those lines. You cannot understand how outside of the norm some genetic talent can be. And so in that case, I would certainly not look at them and say, that's how I'll get my best results. In my opinion, what you should be looking at is look at the bog standard athlete, the bog standard genetic mush that most of us are, and say, how do they get the best results? And most people get the most results from monitoring their macros and eating as closely to an ideal macro split as you can possibly get. If you want to lose weight, being in a calorie deficit, keep your protein slightly higher, keep your carbs slightly lower, and moderate fats. And I would say in those cases, don't hear hooves and think zebras. You're going to hear hooves and think horses.
So one of the things is definitely that in the short run, you're probably going to see not a major difference in the outcome over maybe a 12-week training block if you're just controlling for macros as opposed to food choices. Now, in some cases, the more metabolically healthy you are, just the leaner you are and the better shape you are, you'll tolerate those poor food choices better and have a better time transferring that to performance. So if you're someone who is just very fit, lean, lots of muscle mass, well used to training, you'll see those people, once you get sufficient macros, sufficient amount of protein, carbs, and fats to maintain normal metabolic health, you'll see that they will perform quite well. What we're always wondering about here is the fact that over the long term, how would the quality of nutrition affect your performance in terms of health? And then how would that health affect your ability to keep performing? And if you're really, really off, then there's probably going to be some issues there. But the thing is, I just can't really think of anyone who eats like absolute crap. It's almost, if you're controlling for macros and training, it's almost impossible. You would have to try and eat like shit to actually have really bad micros. So that's the reason the micros are obviously micros, is because the quantities of them are quite small in the grand scheme of things. So if you're controlling for macros for the most part, it's just going to start making sense where you look at, you look at 5 biscuits and you see 500 calories and you see 40 grams of fat, but you've got 50 grams of fat for the day. It just starts to kind of self-control itself. It's almost a no-brainer where you're like, right, I'll just have my porridge and I'll have my low-fat yogurt because it just won't fit any other way. So it's kind of self-fulfilling in the fact that controlling for macros usually forces you to, by and large, try and fit in better quality foods. The main thing here is, will a multivitamin cover everything? Is there other micronutrients that's not covered in that? Are they sufficient forms to actually give you a benefit? Then obviously people will make the argument that the quality of food isn't as good as it used to be in certain places, and where's the source of that food? So I would say macros will cover you, because if you're following macros and they're reasonable macros, it just quickly makes sense to fit better quality foods in there.
Gustavo
says, for general strength, squat strength, how often should I front squat versus back squat? Right now, I'm currently just back squatting 3 times a week. And also, should I throw in some deadlifts? So for back squatting strength, you do not need front squats. Front squats just aren't a great assistance exercise for the back squat. They're certainly a good assistance exercise, but the problem with that is the fact that you're not really going to see much of improvement on your back squat from the front squat in a really specific sense. So if you say you add 20 kilos to your front squat, you're not going to see a corresponding increase in your back squat. Now, typically it does work the other way. If you add 20 kilos to your back squat, you will see an improvement in your front squat. So in terms of for general strength, you absolutely do not ever need to ever look at the front squat in any fashion. What you need to be looking at is more specific assistance exercises like your upper back, your legs, your unilateral work, your core are all much more important. Now, obviously, the front squat will focus on those to a certain degree, but you want to reduce the kind of broad spread of fatigue. When you're doing assistance exercise, you want to make it a bit more specific. And then when we're looking at specific needs for the back squat for general strength, you don't need the front squat. The deadlifts can help the back squat again in a general fashion. And in some cases, that upper back strength and lower back strength will be quite useful, but you don't need deadlifts to improve your back squat. Oh my goodness, it's an hour.
T-Dace?
Yes.
T-Dace says, tried front foot elevated dumbbell split squats. Are these solid for hypertrophy as well as the assistance for squats, replacing hack squats for the time being? Front foot elevated split squats are a phenomenal tool for hypertrophy and as well as an accessory for the squat. So when we look at accessory movements, generally speaking, they fulfill a handful of roles. First one here, obviously, is hypertrophy, stimulating those muscle tissues to grow, to gain cross-sectional fiber area, right? Now, what do we need in an accessory movement to make it good for hypertrophy? Well, the main thing we need is we have to be able to do a lot of volume with it. So that means things like quad Nordics aren't that great for hypertrophy. They're great for other things, but for hypertrophy, they're not great. Also, things like pull-ups. If you're 120 kilos and not great at doing pull-ups, you can only get 2 or 3 good reps in. They're not going to be great for hypertrophy because you're not going to be able to get enough volume in there. Front foot elevated split squats are really good for hypertrophy because we can do a lot of volume with it. We can easily modulate the load by having different weight dumbbells in our hands or barbells on our back. We can increase the range of motion we're going through by elevating the front foot more or less. And then it allows us to get a really nice hypertrophy stimulus by getting that exercise done. The second area they're really good at is the thing you mentioned here as an accessory for the squat. So usually when we want to get bigger, better squats, we have to look at a couple of areas. And one of these areas is stability and control of the knee joint. I want to make sure I don't have 2 wobbly sticks underneath me when I'm squatting. And in order to control that movement throughout the entire range of motion of the squat, practicing things like a front foot elevated split squat can be really good. Where is that knee tracking? Is it tracking straight over the center toes of my foot? Or am I pushing it too far out to the side or letting it cave in into valgus knee rotation? All of these things can be effectively trained by using something like the front foot elevated split squat to get there.
Okay, let's pick one or two. Tim Rickson, as a track cycling sprinter, while training looked like Olympic lifter, some more leg specific exercise makes sense. Of course, it's combined with cycling on the track. So, Tim, what I would do with track cyclists is actually don't really do any Olympic lifting for the most part. It's not absolutely necessary. So, the back squat is the primary driver. Definitely single leg squats are useful in addition as a kind of secondary leg driver, but the main is the back squat and getting that to a decent place. You know, if you can get that to 2.5 times body weight, if at all possible, a pretty deep squat, we generally high bar, mid bar. If you can get that well below parallel, then you're definitely looking at a position where you've got lots of excess leg power and you see a really good corresponding increase in the wattage on the, say, watt bike, for example, on their outputs. When you improve that, barbell on the back, Bulgarian split squats are definitely something that are very beneficial as well. And then deadlifting, I do find that is beneficial in addition. So getting that deadlift, again, close to that 2.5 times body weight. It doesn't absolutely have to be as big a priority, but just the ability for overall strength transfers quite well to the bike. Lastly, then, obviously, if core work, upper back work, there's some benching as well included. All of that strength of just that general capacity and maximizing those bigger areas always transfer really well to something like a power output there. So don't neglect the specifics. Generally, not really seeing a major need for the Olympic lifts. You can certainly add them in and they might be beneficial. Power clean would be a great one there. I know we had the Dutch team with that dude with that really nice power clean. Remember that guy with 140 kilos power clean? See, the things with the power cleans is they're pretty low impact, I would say. So for the most part, unless you're very, very strong at power cleans, you can do them quite consistently and they're not going to give you a major downside in terms of fatigue and training. But at the same time, they're also not going to have a major output change until you get very, very good at something in the power clean. So if you're currently, let's say you're 90 kilos on the bike, you power cleaning 90 kilos is going to be beneficial to a certain degree, but it's not really going to make a big impact until you're doing something like sets and reps with 120 plus or 130 plus for the most part. So very little Olympic lifting, if at all, is actually necessary. And then, of course, if you want to improve that power stuff, once you feel like you're sufficiently strong while doing track, because it's hard to balance the plyometric work and the jumping, but adding in some depth jumps, some more higher repetition, more extensive style plyometric training, maybe a bit of bounds, a little bit of hopping, bunny hops, band assisted, vertical jumps, for example, testing those numbers and seeing how they're improving would be what I'd be looking at there. But the Olympic lifts, nice little cherry on top, but most of the cake is squatting, pulling, and you'd be surprised with that upper body strength how important that is just for the overall integrity of the cake, to keep this cliche going, and I can't get out of it now. But Olympic lifting,
The overall general structure and
the style of this batter, if you'll imagine it. No, so the Olympic lifts, nice to have, but not very necessary. In fact, I would say you could go all the way. I don't know if Chris Hoy ever did any form of them. I wish I could remember that Dutch sprinter's name with a really nice 140 power clean.
I'm sure we'll be told.
Yeah, if someone can remember, that'd be interesting.
Will you go back to the bottom there for the last question?
All the way down?
Yeah.
This one?
If quad Nordics aren't good for hypertrophy, what are they good for? So this is a really good question. Previously in the live stream, I said certain movements were great for hypertrophy, but quad Nordics weren't one of them. So what a quad Nordic is basically kneeling down on your knees, keeping your hips forward and then leaning back as much as possible. And the best thing about quad Nordics is the huge amount of isometric load that we put through our quadriceps and patellar tendon while we're in that position. As weightlifters or as athletes who are in the gym squatting a lot, one of the main injury niggles people are going to pick up is going to be tendonitis of the patellar tendon and quadriceps tendon. This is why the meme of weightlifters always having sore knees exists. It's because degradation of those tendons is quite significant and we don't stimulate them in a very measured or controlled way for a lot of our training sessions. A lot of weightlifters are only really going to load the quadriceps tendon when aggressively catching a snatch or clean and jerk, or when they're bouncing out of the bottom of the squat. Because of that reason, they're under massive amounts of load when the quadriceps tendon is actually being used, and this is just overstressing that unit rather than it being loaded up incrementally by doing things like plyos, hops, bounds, jumps, and lands, and then gradually over time building up that amount of weight. Rather, a weightlifter will go from doing no jumping, landing, plyometrics, or any sort of dynamic movement with their knee, and suddenly the first piece of dynamic movement they're doing in a session is going to be catching 120 kilos on the clean and massively loading that quadriceps tendon up for a few fractions of a second. Quad Nordics and isolation work in general is going to be a really nice alternative to loading that tendon without having it to be a massive ballistic or dynamic movement we're doing. So for that case, almost all weightlifters will have some quad Nordics in their training pieces, in the same way where a lot of athletes who are doing a lot of sprinting are going to have a lot of hamstring Nordics in there, because that isolated isometric movement or that isolated hold we're going to be doing is a really nice way of building integrity within those tendons without massively loading the system.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much for your questions. There's actually lots of other questions we'll get to, but unfortunately, there's other work we have to get to. Dun, dun, dun. You know, one thing I will say, a lot of you, I know you like Gabriel as well and stuff. So when things like that happen online, it is nice to see, you know, support from other people. You know, it helps. I know Gabriel doesn't care. I was talking to him already, and obviously it's just not something that would ever bother Gabriel. But it is nice to see, because you see people kind of attacking him in terms of, you know, calling him a YouTuber, saying you're like, takes a doper to no one or whatever, which is kind of funny in some ways. It's a bit ironic. But, you know, it is nice to see you, just if you are in support of Gabriel, let other people know on social media. Not saying go attack anyone, but there was a few people defending Gabriel, which is nice, because especially when something like that happens online, you know, it's not super pleasant, especially just giving his opinion on something. And the real person you should blame is Clarence. Okay, see you later. Thanks for all your questions, and have a lovely day. Midweek? Is it midweek?
It is.